Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure once again to have you all with us for the Adda series. And as you all know, that this Adda series has been taking place for the last 2 to 3 years. Initially, it started with me and Arnab just having casual conversations, but then we thought that just two people just cannot have Adda. It has to be expanded. Many more voices need to be invited to be a part of it, and that is how we are gradually we are trying to um, diversify as much as possible. And we are absolutely delighted today to have you, Ananya, with us. And Ananya, I know that you have been so super busy doing amazing work, and you found some time, some window for us, and we are so glad to have you with us. Obviously, Ananya Jahanara Kabir doesn't require an introduction type, but just to do a very basic formality. She's currently working as a professor, officially in English, but I mean, obviously, that's a very narrow way of putting her to the front at the King's College London. And she's also a British Academy Fellow, and she has won various awards. She won the Humboldt Prize in 2018, and various other awards as well. She's currently working uh, on a project about the allegor politics of dance, which is very much related vastly to a work on Creole. We are going to talk about Creole today, um, specifically on food, obviously. And I mean, she has endless number of wonderful publications based on her work. She has been traveling across the world. She holds a very interesting set of very fluid and porous identities, as she always sort of put out in her work. And there is many endless things to talk about Ananya, but what we will try to do right now is in connection with her work. We would now start our Adda. So once again, a very warm and loving welcome to you, Ananya, on our show.
Thank you, Shan, for having me. And, we've been exchanging for a while now. I also had the pleasure of getting to meet you in person last year when you invited me with your colleagues to your university, Alliance University in Bangalore, which was a great experience. And I met your students. So yeah, I feel we are talking as friends, as an adda should be, of course. And I'm very happy to be here, and hopefully we'll have people joining us. And to those who are already here, thanks for being here. And yeah, let's roll.
Sure. So, Ananya, I mean, I was wondering to begin with. I mean, there are so many perspectives to begin with, so it's difficult to really tone down where to start from. Or probably this is the fun of being in a Creole space where you really don't know, don't have a linearity of introduction and conclusion, right? So, one interesting thing, I mean, following your posts on the social media and looking at what you publish, what you write, what you think around all of these elements. One thing I've observed that how you really acknowledge your uh, multi-rooted origin, and when I use the word rooted, I just don't use it as ROOT, also ROUTE as well. In terms of your ethnic origin, cultural origin, in terms of your movements because of your work, research, or just travel, in terms of your family based in different parts of South Asia, across Europe, and other parts of the world, and how you actually um, present these narratives as a very integral part of your research, which I believe are one of the many ways that have shaped your attitudes and approach towards shaping your research on Creole. Now, since we're talking particularly about food today, would you mind sharing some aspects of how your personal experiences, personal life since your childhood days have actually contributed towards your interest, your understanding of all the wonderful research that you do around Creole food cultures?
Sure. So, firstly, I think I'll just say that yes. Like many people in South Asia, we the post-colonial condition, has meant that we are alienated from several points of origin, but in a way that's also perhaps helpful, because for me, I started thinking about origins as decentered rather than centered. It's always like I've got like ancestral sort of roots, the OOTS in what is now Bangladesh. So I've been quite fortunate because my family is still there. So if I wish, I can visit. But instead of lamenting that, oh, we don't have anything, we've left it behind, or it's not accessible, at some point I early realized that this was actually an advantage, like something that frees you. You can look back and say, yes, that's something to which I belong, but I don't have to like cling on, that possessiveness, which sometimes can be limiting. That was a starting point, to not have a possessiveness. Then again, like many of us, my parents moved from Calcutta when I was quite small. I was growing up all over India, and it meant that it of course means certain disadvantages, like I don't really read Bangla very fluently. Honest confession, because it was like my third language, and I only studied it for like 2 years in school when I came back to Kolkata. So the point is that with all these fragments swirling around in our lives, perhaps for me that's a more productive way to approach life itself, and of course work and interests and everything, rather than feel very sad or sorrowful that, oh dear, one doesn't have any one place to attach oneself to, etc. And I think that's always defined what I like to work on. I always like to work on what I don't know. So, in a way, what I identify with really shapes me, because I'm always looking for something that's a little bit out of my reach. And I think you're a bit like that as well. Curiosity is drawing you. And then this is where I have actually made a theoretical point about this in some of my articles, that we affiliate ourselves to certain cultures. We don't have to filiate, So filiation is this idea that you're genetically related. You're born, you have siblings, blood relatives. And affiliation is the opposite. But it's about like choosing, to be interested in something, to have friends, to enter cultures. Sometimes people do it because they fall in love with people. Other times, I mean, that's not the only route. You can simply just be in love with life itself. You don't have to have a love interest, a romantic interest to draw you into some culture. So we've been on these similar journeys, I think, because of this propensity to affiliate ourselves, to various kinds of marginalized cultures, or at least, let's say, we like to go to places where we don't belong, you know, and we make it our own, or we somehow learn to understand those spaces by how? By entering the habitus of those spaces. Food being a very important part of that, of course, through music, through dance. You have also explored all these different avenues, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. So when you're asking me for some formative memories or moments in which I can say that that's really, when I look back, and I think that's where my interest in what I now define as creolized food cultures started. I could say it was growing up in this area of Park Circus in Calcutta, and I've talked about this many times. We were that was where I spent the first few years of my life, and though I left Kolkata, and my family was still there, my extended family, so I always kept coming back to it. And that's also where I ended up finishing with my school when we came back to Kolkata. And so it's like, it's my hub, it's like a place I always return to. It's like my Para, the neighborhood that I can't forget. And it was very mixed. There were lots of Anglo-Indians, Muslims of different kinds, Sikhs, Hindus, of course, Bengali Christians. I mean, heterogeneous kind of a group. And it had a very interesting food culture as well, which I now realize is really an imprint of an old creolized, various layers of creolization, I think, in the food culture of Park Circus, Calcutta, Bengal, and one could say even India. So, like, we, a very common phenomenon in school was that we would all bring our tiffin, of course, and everybody would bring whatever they ate at home. This was a very different kind of space perhaps than what
Yeah.
people know today, because nobody minded if anybody had anything in their tiffin. They did not necessarily were sanctioned to eat at home. Rather, to be honest, and I hope this doesn't get me into any kind of trouble with any of the powers that be, but I think we can relax a bit these days. You know, we were actually interested in eating what was in someone else's tiffin. We did it without feeling scared that we were breaking some taboo. People would be coming to my home and they would tell my mother, Mashima, please একটু beef curry বানাবেন. My mother is like, আমরা এত খাই না, তোর বন্ধুদের জন্য বানাতে হচ্ছে. Like I have to make it for your friends. Likewise, I would land up in my friends' homes and they would be like, there would be some sausage curry, there'd be something, sorpotel. We were always experimenting and we did this without any fear and any prohibit any kind of, it was all part of growing up in that space. And of course, if you when you grew older and you wanted to say no, that's not for me, that, but this was all part of experimenting and getting to know a kind of the people around us, and there was nobody casting any judgment on anyone who wanted to do that. Equally, nobody cast judgment if people didn't want to do that. It was live and let live. So for me, this was this experience of growing up in a particular Calcutta milieu, I think, was really important, because it showed how you could affiliate yourselves to each other and each other's cultures, say through food in this instance.
No, I think it's a wonderful point to start with, and I really appreciate amongst the various perspectives that you shared is the whole tiffin culture, and which is now sort of is almost vanishing off. I mean, with respect to this, all of this very, I usually put it as a very sort of elitist kind of attitudes where you have these very flashy canteens and where you in the name of hygiene and in the name of smartness you go and dine there again, which I mean, it's a personal choice. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, but what I'm trying to tell is this whole sort of intimacy that we sort of established through these exchanges of tastes, exchanges of cuisines, and as you rightly shared, like we also would, it just reminds me of my childhood days as well. I'm pretty sure probably everybody of a childhood days in some ways or the other, where would be like hit a friend's home that this particular item was so delicious, and probably they will find, oh, this is so normal. How this person find it so special and delicious, right? So
Yeah.
this whole sort of exchange, which also kind of now um, tries to kind of motivates me to sort of put this whole dimension of uh, this whole idea of being in a creole space into a broader perspective. And also because, Ananya, I know you have also uh, and you work in a lot of intersectional ways. Like, I mean, it's not just creole, but also you simultaneously in sort of in an intertwined way, you are also talking about post colonization, you are talking about border politics, you are obviously talking about the critiquing in very suave ways the right wing political ideologies, not just in India but across the world. So many different elements are coming here. So I always have this question, and I know it's a quite a problematic question, but still I would like to put it forth here that when we talk about these sort of boundaries, obviously everything cannot be sort of, all the blame cannot be on the colonizers, but also isn't it in a way that a lot of boundaries in terms of food cultures that have been established, which are not just religious centered, not just like, okay, these are like pure Hindu foods or Muslim foods or Christian foods, etc., but a lot of these boundaries which we talk as like good food, bad food, like high food, low food, or hygienic food, unhygienic food. Haven't we drawn a lot of these sort of boundaries from vastly from the narratives of colonization that they have imposed on us, the European colonization? And don't you think like the Creole can be a very interesting phenomenon, a very interesting method of sort of dismantling those hierarchies?
Okay, so firstly, I think these hierarchies or these assumptions, or shall we say judgments, value laden judgments that we might bring onto assessing what what food ways are desirable or even permissible. Sometimes they're simply taboos, and it's not about choosing, you just don't go there. There are many different sources, of which I would say colonialism and a certain kind of, again, hierarchies, colonialism imposed on us is one, but it's not. For example, the religion-based taboos, predated colonialism and survived colonialism, British colonialism in this case. Now, this is why I think it's really important to be super specific, because in other kinds of colonial regimes like the Portuguese or the French, they simply just went all out and simply imposed, insisted that if we are colonizing you and you have to accept even our religion. So, so for example, the French, the in Pondicherry, those people who became French subjects did so by embracing Christianity and therefore giving up the taboos that they might have had, around say eating beef. So, or likewise, so what I mean is that some taboos, some sorts of frames and strictures were certainly imposed on us by the colonial rulers. Many others were imposed on us by other, systems of, dictating how you live your life, such as religion. And of course, in South Asia, we also have caste, which kind of goes alongside religion, because of course, caste is a structure that pertains to Hinduism as such. But when you are a South Asian person, you are really permeated by that structure. And I don't think it matters what religion you are, because you are kind of casteist, we have the mentality. So there you would have another set of, prohibitions and proscriptions. So, for example, Dalit foods, this is becoming a big topic now, of resistance. People are talking about the fact that there is a Dalit food way, there's a Dalit cuisine. Often it's a cuisine that has to make do with discarded stuff, or stuff that nobody likes, or stuff that's of low value, and it's being made into something high value. Some of those elements will intersect with what some populations eat. For example, Dalit food circulates around offal, the kind of lesser desirable parts of the animal, and these are very highly desired, say for in Muslim and Christian, cuisines. But for example, Dalits also cook a lot with blood. I don't really see that entering any kind of South Asian Muslim cuisine that much, unless they're also Dalit, you see. So there are kinds of like Venn diagrams, there's so many overlaps. We have to think about a very complex, it's almost map. What are the different circles of exclusion, actually, when before we come to the core of what do we eat and what do we not eat? And 90% of it is really dictated by all these frames of exclusion, which most people, we are conditioned to accepting without questioning, because everybody wants to fit in society, and people normally want to just do what everybody else does, because otherwise it's uncomfortable. So except, as I said, in certain milieus which seem to promote this sort of permissiveness, again within boundaries. Most of us in this situation that I was telling you about when I was growing up, we were not bringing that food into our homes. I was not bringing some pork into my home, or people were not taking beef into their homes. Even vegetarian friends were not taking non-veg into their homes. But I think nobody was asking, what really are you eating outside? Or when you go to your... So, there was a kind of within limits, there was a permissiveness. So that sort of accommodation and adjustment is what we have to understand if we now want to bring this idea of creolization to think about, can we understand what is going on when we don't do certain things, when we feel able to do certain things? If you want to analyze it, can we think about a way to do it? And I think we could say, yeah, we can say that in certain societies, which are called Creole societies, they had perforce, had to adopt many of these strategies we are talking about, and kind of create their lives around these strategies of accommodation and compromise and innovation. So maybe we can detect some of those same strategies elsewhere, and we can say, right, this is a way of responding to exclusions and limitations, which we can call strategies around creolization. So that's the way I would say.
Hmm. And also, when you were sharing these perspectives about this very very complex layers of cooking and eating, and what to, and the kind of complex layers that feed into our psyche to sort of make this whole categorization of
Yeah.
what is valid for what kind of food is valid for us or consumable for us and what is not. I was also, it was sort of reminding me, which also I often question and critique in my expressions as well, is the whole question of authenticity, right? And within India, uh, and outside India specifically, where I have always been very intrigued and sometimes, not always, to a certain extent, irritated by this whole connotation of authentic Indian cuisine, right? And where they will only cherry pick certain, sort of well established items which have been mostly desired by the Europeans as Indian. Though they are very localized and locally sort of positioned within India, if we try to locate them, and as authentic Indian. But also, talking even within India, I mean, we have these conversations like even we had this very interesting fight, conflict a few years back, talking about to whom Rashagolla belongs to, right? Whether it's a Bengalis thing or a thing of the Orisha, even it went to the court. Even it became so serious, right? But somewhat I feel very confused with this whole, at my personal level, I feel very confused with this whole concept of authenticity. I mean, how do I associate or how do I understand the concept of authenticity, especially in a place where spices, tastes, items have traveled across, got mixed up locally, and then sort of have created new forms of tastes and colors and different sort of food items. So in that sort of circumstance, um, I'm just thinking that what do you like? Do you how do you positionalize, or do you think there is a space of authenticity within the space of Creole? Do you think that authenticity can be understood, or authenticity can have any place when we engage with Creole foods and Creole cultures, or Creole food cultures per se? Um, can you hear me, Ananya?
Can you hear me, people? Can you hear me, Shayan?
Yes, yes, yes. Could you hear me, Ananya?
I have some problems with my. I don't know why it's suddenly coming as an issue. Wait, let me try to go through my iPhone.
Yeah, yeah, no, no worries. Please take your time.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sure, I can hear you. Can you hear
Okay,
me now?
it's a bit better. Yeah. So I lost a bit.
Oh, don't worry. I'll just
Your
repeat. I'll just repeat the question.
yeah.
It's fine. It's absolutely fine. So, I mean, basically, what I was just sharing, Ananya, was like when you were talking about this whole different sort of layers of what food can be consumed, what cannot be consumed. I was also sort of intrigued by this whole. I was simultaneously thinking about this whole concept of authenticity, that we often
Yes.
associate with particular food items. A lot of these restaurants across India and the world, they talk about, authentic Punjabi restaurant, authentic Bengali restaurant, authentic South Indian restaurant, etc., right? And I have always, sort of been intrigued and, to be very honest, being confused also, that how do I sort of understand or interpret the term authenticity, especially when we see that how tastes, how spices, how raw materials, and how different sort of tastes and foods have been combined together, produced, are being combined. Like, for instance, we say, Chinese, but practically speaking, there are different layers of Chinese foods in India, which actually has no sort of relationship, or let's say hardly any sort of relationship with the so-called Chinese foods being served in China. And then you have like a Bengali Chinese, you have a sort of a Banarasi Chinese. I mean, being in Banaras for 10 years, I can sort out the difference. You can have a Delhi Chinese, you can have a Kannadiga version of Chinese, which sort of infuse the very local flavors into some of these established so-called Chinese flavors of a mix of mishmash of sauces and all. So, I'm just giving this example to tell. So, in these circumstances, how do we do, or rather, do you at all think that authenticity, this notion of authenticity or authentic taste, authentic food, authentic cuisine, has any place within the conversations and the dynamics of Creole foods? Or Creolization is very critical about this notion of authenticity?
I mean, obviously, people who are themselves of self proclaimed Creole communities may wish that their Creole is also considered authentic. So what I'm saying is that the desire for authenticity, I think, is a normal part of human nature. And I think people crave it in some form or the other. As scholars, we can deconstruct it or we can be critical of it and we can say that this is something that people wish to impose. It should not be seen as a given or a starting point. Rather, it should be questioned from the very beginning to see what are the stakes, what is impelling people to claim something is authentically theirs or not, or something is not. So I think where our starting point should be, and therefore it's, I think, difficult to claim that there exist no groups of people in the world who are self-declared Creoles and who will say we are not authentic, because that would be to deny them that normal human desire of wanting to be rooted, which we are kind of playing with a little bit, and also saying that we have to accept it, but we have to also critique it, because if we don't have a critical eye on it, it can lead to all sorts of misunderstandings, and in fact, it can become hegemonic or you be used as a tool for someone else, and so on. Hi, Nukhbah, great to see you. Basically, for me, I would say that what we see in cultures that are historically Creole cultures and cultures which are impacted by those Creole cultures and are therefore Creolized. That's the way I look at it. In these situations, there is a very overt understanding of fragmentation and all kinds of assemblages as being part of one's identity. Okay, that is quite like if you're a Creole, say in uh, Saint Martinique, or say you're a French Caribbean Creole person, I will take the example of Haiti, actually, because I've been talking to our common friend, Professor Michel Legraf. I see you know him. He's a scholar, he's Haitian, he's a scholar of Haitian Creole, and he is militating for the use of Haitian Creole as a as an academic language to teach mathematics and science and everything in. Now, it would be very difficult for us to go to him and say, listen, Creole is not authentic. And he will say, well, it's authentic. It's authentic for the children who are speaking it as their mother tongue, right? We're talking about language here. So, but he's also aware that this Creole has come from many different, historical conjunctures and collisions and departures and fragmentations. So, if you want to start looking for a history of what is authentic or not authentic, you do run the danger of somebody else saying Creole may be authentic, but it is not it is an inauthentic version of French. So we just want to, dissociate ourselves from these ontologies. And we don't want to have these kind of genealogies, rather. We don't want to say this has descended from this and therefore it's less or more. We just want to say that each situation is kind of as authentic as the other, quote unquote. But seeing that is the case, our job is not to worry about authenticity as something essential. It is perhaps an interesting thing to see what is constructed and how it is useful or strategic for some people to think about being authentic, others for us to intervene and say this is not a useful proposition. Do you see what I'm saying? It is really a very relative. It's actually a relative issue. It's not an absolute for me, the idea of authenticity, whether it pertains to being Creole or being anything else.
No, absolutely. And this is actually why I asked you, because number one thing is the whole notion of purity that is associated with the notion of authenticity is kind of, I find, very problematic. And the number second is a wider, the socio-political climate that we are seeing is how much we are um, always trying to associate the notion of purity with everything that we are trying to do around us, that this is pure, this is rooted, This is from where we all emerge, whether we are talking about taste, whether we are talking about cultures or rituals or whatever. So, I mean, that was another major purpose why I wanted to sort of, understand your perspective. How do you understand this whole notion of authenticity, and which is like very, very well put by you, Ananya. I mean, I know there are also people, and hi, Nukhbah, such a pleasure to see you. And I'm sure I'm going to open it up for the other folks as well. But just one another particular, like, question I was thinking of asking you is, when you have been, I mean, within the Indian space in terms of food, you have written quite a lot about the French Creole, a lot about the French Creole in Pondicherry, apart from the fantastic works in architecture and other aspects that you have done, the Portuguese Creole in spaces like Goa, right? I was just wondering, like, the way you structuralize it, the way you present it in from a methodological point of view, theoretical point of view, also from, if I say, as a sensorial point of view of tasting it and understanding the mix of spices, because I think that's a very important exercise of this whole element, right? Um, but when we try to, or when you were doing your like field researches, and I've seen that you have stayed in people's homes, had home cooked foods and sharing it on the social media, and then also telling us the stories beyond that, and then telling us how it is a Creole. um, I'm just curious to know, to what extent the people who are preparing the foods that have been a part of their family history, community history for generations, to what extent they are aware of the Creole-ness of those food items. Are they aware of it? Do they care about it? Do they think it's important to sort of understand our culinary histories of our family, of our communities as a Creole culinary history? What are their perceptions about these kind of elements?
So yeah, so I'm actually kind of rather I mean, I try to keep the definitions quite controlled, because otherwise everything can ultimately be called Creole, and that I don't really subscribe to. So there are some communities in India that historically call themselves something that sounds like the word Creole. That is, the only example, as far as I can see, is the community in Pondicherry, which calls itself either O Creole, which is high Creole, or Bar Creole, which is low Creole. And in fact, they are mostly, if there's anybody left who is who's a Creole in Pondicherry, is the Bar Creole, the low Creoles, by which they mean people who are already kind of mixed with different kinds of components. The O Creoles are the ones who traditionally were basically white, and they were white French, and they were born, the white French stock born in, say, Pondicherry, but very few of them are really around anymore, so we can discount them. So these people use the word Creole, and we can legitimately, they will describe their food as Creole, because they are Creole people. It's just like we are Bengali, so we will call our food Bengali, There's nothing very suspicious about it. But there, the point is that Creole comes with a capital C and a small c. With the capital C, these are communities where the word Creole or some cognate of it, like Creole in English or Criollo in Portuguese or whatever. So there are different Criollo in Spanish, Criollo in Portuguese. These are different words which are cognate with the word Creole, and they are actually communities that were formed through contact between various kinds of local peoples and different kinds of European speaking Romance languages who all share this Latin root, creare, which means to create. And the word Creole comes from that. Now, there were many other Europeans who were also doing similar things with locals in this early modern period of European expansionism. For example, the Dutch, and they didn't really speak a Romance language, so this word Creole wouldn't exist in the communities they established. other kinds of words were used. But looking back as linguists or as cultural historians, we can say that they were also Creole communities. But then we might use a lowercase c, because they didn't use that word to define themselves. So in this case, we are already seeing that there are communities which we are seeing formed on analogy with communities that call themselves Creole with a capital C. And we may bring this word to bear on them because they exhibit similar historical characteristics. Beyond that, you've got groups who are in proximity to these core communities, and they may then start through affiliation, as I told you earlier, start taking on some of these characteristics and sharing some of the things that they find interesting. For example, the food, as long as it doesn't cross religious boundaries, some of the things that they're cooking may be interesting to other people who are their neighbors. So they borrow the technique. So in this way, the Creole becomes creolized and creolizing. So a creolized culture develops. So for our purposes, of course, it's very interesting that if you go to some communities who call themselves Creole, wherever they are in the world, in the Caribbean, in Pondicherry, wherever, and you say, and they will say, this is our Creole cuisine. In fact, we see the opposite happening. You go to Pondicherry today, whole lot of restaurants are saying they're presenting Creole food. Nothing connected to these Creole. They're just kind of just talking nonsense. So this opposite can also happen, that this word can become quite fashionable and people are just
Mm.
using it for marketing purposes. So either way, you see, there can be a lack of awareness on both sides. What is interesting is that what we see in India is, since people like to, for reasons we've talked about, cling on to notions of purity and authenticity. It doesn't matter how their communities have been formed. They're like, we are a community. They may not use the word Creole to understand why they are presenting themselves or their cuisine in a particular way. And if we want to say to them that this is a kind of Creole cuisine or you are Creolized or whatever, I have often met with a bit of resistance. People sometimes are like, but what do you mean? We are not any of those things. I've even heard people say we are pure, okay, in India, in the context of India. And I'm like, but there's nothing about pure and impure. This is just a way to signal that your culture has a certain history. And then people say, okay, then, all right, okay, we understand it. So I have had to
Mm.
suggest to people that what about using this word to like almost like I'm using it academically to describe why you are the way you are and what are the benefits that the rest of us actually can have from you rather than the other way around, because frankly we all can do with a bit of less obsessiveness around purity, authenticity, and drawing tight borders around ourselves. So I see that these small now marginalized Creole communities, um, whether they call themselves Creole or by some other name, they're actually really important for us to kind of actually take back some of those values and loosen up a bit our borders and boundaries. So often you have to actually explain this to people, talking to people or writing about it, for them to understand that I'm not actually uh, casting aspersions on them by saying this is just an analytical way to understand a history, but
Mm.
it's also a political tool maybe to resist certain political projects which affect all of us. So then people perhaps start loosening up a bit and understanding it's not about branding somebody as being less of this or less of that. It's actually saying you are you belong to a community that actually has a very interesting history that can help all of us work better as diverse societies, in short.
Wonderful. I think this also sort of reminds me of obviously the term that like Duluth and Guattari uses as rhizome. Obviously, they used it in very different set of
Yeah.
contexts, but I think it has a lot of connections with what you're saying. That it's not about being less, but also being more expansive. Being tied to bigger cultures, bigger spaces, bigger timelines, which probably many of us are not aware of. Because often, at least again in the Indian context, we are so much schooled in this whole narrative of associating singular roots, a very narrow direction of purity, authenticity, and all of these aspects. I mean, there are many points that we can talk about, but obviously I just don't want to occupy every space, and it's an Adda. So I would like to invite, I don't know, Srijata or Nob, Nukhbah, if you have any question. I mean, just feel free to unmute and
Or
ask, or
observations, observations or
yeah,
comments.
observations, comments, or just feel free to put in the chat box whatever you feel. Yeah,
Yeah, I have no questions. I was just here for an interest. I'm actually preparing a paper. Actually, it's for your book, for the call for papers that you've circulated, remember? About
My
food
book,
culture or
not
something.
Shion's book. Shion's book.
Yes,
oh,
yeah.
okay, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
So I'm collaborating with Kamaini Kumar. She's from Delhi. So we are preparing an abstract and all. And
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to
although
that.
our interest was on food culture and partition,
Okay.
but we thought maybe Ananya's talk will motivate us more to think from a different
No,
angle
no,
or something.
no. It's a very good angle, Nukba. I mean,
Yeah.
this is super important, and people are writing about food more and more, as we
But
know these
there's a
days.
lot of research on it. So we're kind of
Yeah.
stuck, we're thinking what
So what
aspect
thing?
of
What
it.
what is that? Or is it? Are you going to give away a spoiler? Uh, like what were you thinking of? Kind of what?
We thought of literary texts and then we also thought of Bollywood films.
Mm.
So there is some research on Bollywood films, but not from the perspective of partition and memory.
Say, Shayon, that's a very interesting angle to think about uh, food, film, and partition. You know what I mean? This
Yeah.
triangulation. I don't, off the top of my head, I can't remember reading precisely this kind of connect, between these
Mm-hmm.
topics, each one of which is well, obviously
Yeah.
well trodden, film and partition in particular. But in the last few years, food writing has become a big part of thinking about South Asia, which is great.
Yeah.
um, I think this would be quite an interesting, because you see what film does, as we know, what a narrative, just a literary written text cannot do is it can show you, it can actually show you the food, and
Hmm.
that can trigger in us certain. We are talking about sensorium, Shayon, a moment ago. It can trigger in us certain haptic, responses, like much more strongly than reading something can do. Um, because when we see, suppose the camera is going close up into a dish,
Hmm.
our adjacent senses will be triggered, and we will be almost smelling the food and tasting it as much as seeing it, which obviously even the best writer, will have to be indirect. So I think film is a very fascinating domain to think about all these
Yeah,
complexities.
we're brainstorming and we're going to read your work a little bit and we
I'll
want
tell you
to.
one film, Nukhbah, actually, given that we are talking about, we are sharing ideas. One film, Shayon, even Srijata, all of you must know this, which for me was very interesting as far as food and kind of post-partition explosions in India went. And this was this film about the Northeast. It's an Ahon, what is the thing? Axone. It's spelled.
I
It's
think
the
it's
Naga
ahom. Ahom?
Ah,
Yeah, I think
Ahoni.
X is the her sound probably.
Axone. Okay, that's the name of the film, and it's this Naga fermented condiment. I think it's fermented soybeans or something like this, and it is supposed to be highly like odoriferous, and obviously it is a cultivated taste. But everything is in a way. Everything that's a bit strong tasting, people have to learn to like it, or they are wanted the taste for it. So now this film is about a small group of northeastern young people in Delhi. As we know, this is a very common phenomenon that they are there for work, for studies. I mean, obviously they're Indian, so why shouldn't they be in Delhi doing whatever they want to do? But they're also discriminated against a huge amount, and this is almost like a racist behavior, frankly speaking, on the part of the North Indians towards the people from the Northeast. And in this film, this entire racism is congealed around this food stuff,
Hmm.
which they are homesick. So when they cook with it, it's like a communal thing. And they are afraid of cooking with it because then they are liable to be thrown out
Hmm.
of their rented accommodation and all the rest. It's a very touching film. And for me, this was very interesting because even though it said nothing about partition, it was not about partition, it was just set in Delhi, it was set in contemporary Delhi. Somehow there was something about, those hauntings by partition that we all have. Like there was some superimpositions. It was making me think of all those exclusions that happened and partition happened because of them. So I think that for you guys, that will be an interesting film to look at. I recommend it. No. Already I'm writing an abstract for you. I'd better stop.
Yeah, we'll look into it. We're trying to expand that project as well. So let's see what comes out of it.
And I don't know if Sreejata and Arnab, what?
Yeah, Arnab is encountering issues with. He just texted me with his something happening with his internet, so he's unable to unmute.
Sreejata,
Yeah, I was going to say I really enjoyed that film as well. I think in the film they pronounced the dish as akuni. I don't know if that's correct. Yeah,
I mean,
but
probably
that's
I
what I
couldn't
remember.
remember. Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. It was such an interesting film, and
Yes.
it. I do you feel like me that there was some echo of partition in there, or some? Or am I reading too much in that?
I don't know if I'm seeing it that way, but I can definitely say like the film is it's a very thick sort of ethnography of
Yeah,
northeastern students in Delhi, the kind of things they hear every day, the kind of experiences they have all the time, trying to find that one store, in some part of
yeah.
Delhi that sells that particular ingredient that they need. It was very nice. I quite enjoyed the film.
You know, now the film is coming back to me bit by bit. And I think the reason why I started making the connection with partition was, correct me if I'm wrong, Srijata, but they also have these landlords and neighbors which are Punjabi,
Oh
obviously they're
yes.
in Delhi. So there is some sort of like, mainstream that is around them. But I think sometimes in what they are saying and how they are behaving, they let slip some memory or connection to their past of displacement, but it's quite subtle. So I think that the film, for me, at one point I thought, oh, this would be an interesting film to try and work these subtleties out and see if there was really this partition subtext. But,
No, you're absolutely right. The Punjabiness of the people who are the landlords is very, very, it's very much there. So I don't think
yeah.
we're reading too much into that.
No, but I think so Nukhbah, go ahead and please use this film for Shayon's book, and then we can all read
Yeah,
about it.
yeah, I'm going to look into it. Thank you for the idea.
I wonder if I can. I don't know if it's a question really. I really don't know anything about creolization in terms of theory. But what you were saying about the capital C and the small c, maybe I
Yeah,
can try to plug into that
yeah, of course.
through a family recipe, which I've inherited through marriage, really. So I
Okay,
am married to a Christian from Uttar Pradesh,
okay,
and we have this thing that we make at home. It's sort of like pasande, but it's called parche. I was
okay.
trying to look up the etymology of parche. Why parche? So my husband's great grandmother was French, and the interesting thing about this version of the dish is instead of using yogurt in the marinade, we use vinegar. Uh,
Oh, okay, okay. That's interesting.
and I was wondering if like parche comes from like Italian, the word parco, which means like spare or using something sparingly. I'm not really sure, but yeah,
Is this like a version of lamb chops?
it is. It is. It is. But
Yeah.
but you use vinegar, so it doesn't end up tasting the same at all as a Mughal version of the dish would taste. But yeah, that's essentially what we
Yeah,
use.
I'm not able to comment off the top of my head on the name of the dish, but the very fact that vinegar is used is a really interesting sign of this of the fact that it comes from a family that has been Christian for a few generations, right?
Mhm.
And that's what I also mean about this creolizing situation. Now, your in-laws' family is from Uttar Pradesh, and therefore they are very far inland and they're not connected to any coast of India, as far as I can make out, right?
Mhm.
So, nevertheless, they have in their version of making this meat dish an ingredient that is very associated with the coastal Creole communities initially established by the Portuguese entry into India, which is basically the even the coasts, the Malabar Christian,
Mhm.
Latin Catholic around Fort Kochi, and this Subsequently, from there, the Portuguese entered Goa, right? So it's really very close, and then it is quite established through different kinds of evidence trails that around even before the French started um, consolidating the hold in Pondicherry, those Indo-Portuguese people had also already moved to Pondicherry, and they were creating little settlements. All these people, their cuisine was marked by the use of vinegar.
Okay.
Yeah. And this vinegar is the iconic use is in the Vindaloo, the Portuguese
Right.
in Goan Vindaloo. But it's also there, for example, in the Pondicherrian version, which is called Vindalye. They have to sprinkle some vinegar on it. They make it in a completely different way, but they will sprinkle some vinegar. So even in Calcutta, where we have this food that we associate with Anglo-Indian communities, we will use vinegar. So vinegar for me, I haven't really done the solid research on this, but I have tracked how it is like a connecting agent. And whenever a food has to turn from looking Mughal to looking Christian, the yogurt is substituted and vinegar is put there. But have I got that right in what is happening in your dish?
I think so. I think you're really onto something because I've asked my mother in law again and again, why are you putting vinegar on this? It makes no sense. But she says, this is what my grandmother would do, and
Yeah,
it's just
and
comes
this
out.
again goes back to what Shan was saying. People preserve ways of doing things, People don't have discussions in their head about why we did certain things. They just do it. And that is the embodied memory. That's the embodied culture. Shan knows all about it because he's been studying all the siddhis and all that. They're not going to be sitting and theorizing, that. So your mother-in-law is not going to be saying my grandmother thought that vinegar. They're just doing it. But in
Yeah.
their doing it, there is a certain history. We are commenting on it or trying to analyze it. You know what I mean? We are the people trying to create a historiography out of it, but
True.
they are just the history. So this it would be very surprising. They may have some folk. This typically there could be some folk story. Vinegar was brought by some Portuguese person. You never know. Because people sometimes have these little folk tales to supplement what they do. And again, somebody might say, oh, methodologically, that couldn't have happened. We don't have any evidence, or no archival evidence of this Portuguese person coming here. But the point is not of archival evidence, that this is the point of what a community believes, gives its uh, gives itself. So there's that authenticity, actually, Chayan, that you were talking about. We would see it in the vinegar. You
Yeah.
know, that splash
Thanks.
of
Thanks so
vinegar.
much for that. That's really
So,
helpful.
thank you for helping me consolidate my rudimentary views. That was very helpful.
Wow, this is so fascinating because both the perspectives, like Nukhbah talking about film, food, and partition. This is again, as you rightly mentioned, Ananya, that this is not much done about. I mean, people have talked about, obviously. I mean, film and partition has been a very common topic of exploration, to a vast extent. Food and partition as well, people carrying spices, utensils,
Yeah, yeah.
certain food items across the borders. But these three, how they can be put together, would be fantastic to explore, actually. And thank you for bringing these films, and also Sreejata, like bringing this whole family dish, and how yeah, and how the ingredients also travel. Often we are not aware of the history, but then we see possible connections, and that makes the whole process, going back to right at the beginning, what Ananya, you were sharing, that this whole fascination, the whole excitement lies in the fact that we don't know what it could be. And this process of not being able to decode it exactly as we want it to be, but somewhere stuck in the middle with so many becomings and possibilities, makes the process all the more exciting, I think, in this whole process of Creole conversations. Um,
Yeah.
I have just one thing to talk about. I mean, a question or a perspective, just to share that, and it's like a probably a very generic kind of question. I mean, we have been trying to to come out of this very questionable, problematic state of a very a singular notion of purity and authenticity. We have been trying to imagine counter atlases, right? In terms of using spiceways, food ways, taste, Creole
Mhm.
taste, how they travel across. And I think somewhere, somewhat, because I am personally very fascinated by this concept of counter atlas. Even right now, we are doing a project with Rapti and all of these people. Uh, I somewhere, somewhat feel that how your work, like you are talking of, Mozambique, and you're talking of Goa at the same time. You are talking also of some other parts of the world, and how that sort of whole dismantles the kind of atlas, the kind of map that we are habituated with. It sort of whole
Yeah,
questions the boundaries and perspectives we're habituated with. So do you think in the long run, I mean, I'm not talking of an academic discipline like critical Creole studies or something like that. I don't want to get into that conversation.
that's a
But
great idea. But
yeah,
anyway,
yeah,
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 you're
yeah. But do you think in the long run, Creole as a method, Creole as a practice, whether we are talking about food, architecture, language, or whatever perspectives, can actually help the world collectively reimagine our boundaries and existences and our relationalities with each other in a more wholehearted way? What do you think? How do you see that?
I think even people like Edward Glissant, the theorizers of the who took the idea of the rhizome from Deleuze and Guattari and talked about relationality emanating from the Caribbean through Creoleness in the Caribbean. I think they would definitely have imagined that this rhizome can expand infinitely. There's no boundedness to the rhizome. It is a planetary rhizome. So when we think of it that way, of course, we can say that. Uh, Histories of Creolization and Creole cultures and communities today, of course, they give some of us seeking alternatives to, territorial, bounded, or continentalized, or, nationalistic, whatever you want to call it. There are very many ways of unconsciously just imitating hegemonies that we want to dismantle. So, thinking through creolization can be a useful way to try and find other paths. And I think that many of us are trying to do that in our own ways, and somewhere the efforts are converging, like in this conversation. And I feel happy that some work that I started some time ago managed to reach a bigger audience, and more and more people are thinking, yeah, this is useful. It's a useful way to understand certain things, like Sreejata just gave us this example, and we had a kind of apparatus to try and work out this example. So the point is, though, my only cautionary note would be that we should not do this at the expense of the actual Creole communities, both in South Asia and elsewhere, who have often historically and are still suffering from marginalization and, a lot of shame because they have internalized these notions of superiority and what is good and what is not good and what is valuable and what not valuable, and they've internalized those assumptions, and they are societies which are struggling to actually make use of their own resources. So while we are excited about discovering these resources and we want to use them to correct our own situation, we obviously should do it not with, again, this would be very ironic to appropriate away the Creole resources from Creole people and not give anything or not kind of acknowledge that. So we must be mindful that even there we can slip into this old usual academic political situation where we just kind of, in a very well-meaning way, we take things, for our use, and we kind of forget they are very real situations where people are enmeshed with these categories, and they're actually perhaps struggling because of them, not getting emancipated. So we have to kind of work together. So I think as long as we understand and remember that, I think absolutely these are resources that can definitely help us all. We are in the state of polycrisis in the world today. There's climate change, there's aggravation, there's the stuff going on in Gaza. It's it's abhorrent. Everywhere you see people are rushing towards violence and domination rather than trying to imagine another world. So, if you want to imagine another world, perhaps I agree with you. I think that yes, the resources of creolization are very helpful, but let's not forget those Creole communities who are actually marginalized still because of their history. So those resources should somehow also be, we should be working with them to develop the toolkit. Yeah.
No, I think that's wonderful, and I think it was a great conversation. I know this is a never ending conversation, but somewhere, somewhat, we have to take a pause. So I think that's on a great note that we would like to sort of bring a conclusion to this whole ATA that we were having. And thank you for your wonderful questions and perspectives that you shared, Srijata and Nukhbah. And thank you for your amazing, amazing reflections and the way you have sort of, weave your arguments and perspectives and put it out. It makes so much of sense, so much of value, and most importantly, like, it just is so reassuring in the planetary sense. I mean, reassuring not just in our terms of personal research, but in the planetary sense, that how much it is important for us, for all of us in multiple ways. So, and obviously for those who have not yet, who were unable to, come and join the this whole ADA would be up on the YouTube archive, Roots and Roots, a living archive soon. And we would be sharing it around. And yes, thank you, Ananya. Have a wonderful day ahead. And it
Thank
was great
you.
to have you.
Thanks so much. Nice to see everybody, and have a good weekend also. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.